I'd say recent times have been definitely an experience to behold. Yep, we're living it at that. And because of that experience, many people, at least I hope they did, started taking a bigger initiative into the world of self employment, whether by starting their own businesses like selling water bottles, or into the world of content creation. As I have mentioned before in the show when talking about online content, people that used to see the online world as a place for hobbies and communication started to realize that it's been more than that for at least half a decade. Careers are both created and destroyed through the technological evolution, as well as education being at the reach of a few clicks and a curious personality. And nothing has proven that more than online media. Whether you like the content or not, the internet allows for creativity to be more important than in any other form of traditional media. We all have our favorite shows from big networks, but if you're a consumer of entertainment, also known scientifically as a fat ass that watches TV and videos all day, then you might have an easier time numbering great online creators than TV shows or comic books. However, as we state on the show, there's always an extreme to everything. Creativity can only take you so far, so with this, I'd like to introduce you to this peculiar Japanese show. Keep Your Hands Off Eizouken, a show that tells the story of three girls trying to make an animation studio with colorful characters that serve the dedicated purpose on its show. It manages to show you the process of making animations. Not anime, animation. With a season of 12 episodes, this series manages to be both educational on the elements that animators have to consider when creating visuals, while keeping an entertaining story that keeps you hooked to the point where even if you're interested in the technical aspects, you still get an engaging story to enjoy and a charming sense of humor and childlike nature. However, I feel that this show manages to go beyond the world of animation and be something that everybody that's into multimedia production can get something to learn and experience with this show. I'll start with the proper hit of reality here. Making a proper analysis of the show and its themes requires a lot of knowledge on what the title means. The name Eizouken, according to the MAL translation, stands for Motion Picture Club, but in a rougher translation, it can be seen as Film Association. Both of them apply given the context of the story. The basic premise relies on how three girls who are very different from one another decide to form a club that can allow them to create animated projects, and it's made under the name given how the animation club is forbidden for one of the main girls. And don't worry, I'll take my time on them individually to explain the story a little bit more. And this is the major point to consider because motion picture is just another term for movie. Despite the series using animation as its genre of media to work with, the elements of the story can be applied to anything related to film production. And let me remind you all that while we have movies as the term for cinematic experiences, the core concept of film is a series of images that are recorded in sequence to create the illusion of continuous motion. So on that regard, we need to avoid removing other forms of content creation like television. In the end, they both end up focusing on this core principle. I know this might sound like a waste of time, but it is important to acknowledge that regardless of the method of work you're using to create a multimedia project, you still need to pay attention to the elements shown on this series. The resources may be different, but making the Aladdin movie in 1992, for example, requires the same production process as making Return of Jafar or the 2019 remake, the only major differences being the resources available and methods to create them. Sure, one may require filming with a camera and the other focuses on canvas, but you're still doing scripts, storyboards, directing, sound editing, video editing, designing, conceptualizing, rendering, the list can go on. The change of methods don't change the core elements of how to create a multimedia project, something that Eizouken, while not the main focus given the subject matter is animated features, does not hide how these elements can apply beyond that specific form of media. One of the best examples of this sort of element is when they talked about audio editing. It is a simple thing to ignore, until it's not taken care of. then it becomes an important element that, if not treated well, will make your best projects feel cheap. If I had to put this on a personal example, it will be with my project of Legend of Zelda: A Bridge to the Wild. Sure, it is a tough and time-consuming task to add the proper sound on every single step. What? No, I don't make deals with strangers. Hell, I still need to explore the rest of the plateau before thinking about getting out of here.
Master Link, it might be a good idea to discuss this with the old man.
Look, I'm not listening to you. I'm just gonna get to this place when Link is walking, but as many editors might tell you, it's the little details like that what will make your work feel more professional. And again, that's the magic of this show. Even though the entire series is focused on these girls making animation, if you're into any kind of media production, you will learn something from this show, both in a technical aspect and a social one. So with that, let's dive into our first main character, Midori Asakusa. She is the first character we really get to have a glance of what she's about, and if I had to give her a metaphorical section in this video, she'd be the representation of creativity in media. She's a passionate artist that has a bigger understanding of how media production works than the rest of the cast. However, she's also a character that lives in its own world and doesn't have the best social skills to work with. However, because of her knowledge and passion, she ends up becoming the director of the team, and as such, she's the one that has to make sure that everything and everyone is working in a way that's fitting for her vision. Which, unlike some businessmen might tell you, is not as easy as just telling people what to do and when to do it. If you don't have the proper sense of leadership and focus on what your work is about, you might as well end with no team at all, since you need to be clear on what you want people to do. In a quote from Mark Twain that says, "When you hire people that are smarter than you prove that you are smarter than them." I like to take this as a testament of how directors need to work. Sure, you are working with people that are smarter or overall better than you on storyboarding, backgrounds, or coloring, but you still need to know all these three things in order to even know what you want from them. You cannot ask someone to give you a better product when you don't even know what's wrong with the previous one. This becomes apparent during the anime robot arc. Asakusa has a hard time telling the team how to do their work the way they need it, so she ends up taking more work by herself because of the lack of leadership, and has a hard time conceptualizing the project because she doesn't know enough about robot engineering. So she doubts her ability to give the people a proper representation of a giant robot in combat. And also, because of the fact that she lives in her own social bubble, she tends to lose focus on the bigger picture from time to time, as she makes her work in a way that without outside help might never come out because she will always lose track of herself instead of making sure her current work is set to go. However, like I mentioned, in a meta level, she shows the pros and cons of letting your creativity run wild in a way that many illustrators may relate, with giant worlds that tell a story just by looking at the designs, as well as huge awareness of how you can visually explain your ideas. And also, going a bit off topic, I love the way the show portrays conceptualization. Not only do the characters interact with this imaginary world that everybody in the team can see through their heads, even the sound effects end up transforming from a cappella sounds by Asakusa into actual sound effects.
タイヤ兼カウンターウェイトをつけてダクテッドファンを二重反転プロペラにして尻尾もつけてトンボみたくしたいパチンパチンパチンガチャガチャそれでは羽の動作確認ジャッシュなんだか
That's so brilliant and something that from my experience, many people actually do when they try to explain what sounds do they want in a certain scene.
ゴゴーンドッボービービービービービービーゴシャンウィーユーカオバッフッドボーンバンカーチャチャーンっていうだね。
Then there's Tsubame Misuzaki. She's also into animation, but unlike Asakusa, she's more into the practice of animation rather than the creativity of it. She's all about the motion aspect of the art. The way people move, the postures they need, how certain fluids move with a specific motion. She's all about making animation as living as possible. Oh, and she's also a supermodel, but we'll talk about that in a bit. But since she sees animation as another form of acting, they forbid her from entering the actual anime clubs. This part is handled in a better way than most other narratives in which an artist chases their dreams despite the family being against it, because it doesn't quite portray any side as the right one. The problem comes with trying to separate them in the first place because, as I mentioned at the beginning, animation is just another form of creating media. The show itself represents that, with a very important sequence of Mizusaki as a child going through a model course. They show you the ways of body language and how that can be also utilized for acting and regular movement outside of work when helping her grandma, which yes, was fucking cute to watch the little girl using her knowledge to help her grandma walk and stand up on her own. She's the kind of artist that will actually try to make fantasy look realistic, because as she puts it, she doesn't want to make anime, she wants to make animation. And that quote is one of her biggest features to take when looking at media creation. Let's stick with anime this time for the sake of simplicity, and to make it even better, let's keep it with Dragon Ball. One of the most appreciated things in the anime are the transformations and narrative elements in which these stories take place, as well as the exaggerations and flashy sequences. However, if you ask me, the fights themselves tend to lose weight as the story keeps going, and that's because the fights become more into clashes of energy blasts and quick steps with fast-paced combos instead of the consistent choreography of each fight during the early days. Now, it should be said that both examples are perfectly fine pieces of work since they're made with different goals and directions in mind. It is unfair to say which one is better when they're very different to begin with. With that said, it is because of that difference that people manage to tell their executions apart and are able to appreciate the ways in which early Dragon Ball managed to keep the scale and weight of the fights, without making their characters have the color of each Power Ranger. The major point I'm trying to make here is that when you start seeing these forms of media as exactly that, instead of what they have made, you begin to realize its full potential and start appreciating it as just another way of showing the exact same thing as you will do in live action. And you can tell that from just the way the main characters move. It's not always the case since you're still given the chance to make your characters act like you wish, but you can tell each character has its own personality and way of acting just by their own movements, with Asakusa being more loose with her proportions, motion and facial features, and Mizusaki being more fluid and consistent. You can see that just with the intro itself. With these explanations, you can kinda see the way both of these characters manage to complement each other, since now you're putting someone with ideas and the worlds to make, and joined by someone that can help making them feel alive and real. However, both of them are artists and passionate ones at that. If those two were the only ones in charge, nothing will ever be done. Asakusa will be so lost in her thoughts to properly get ideas done, and Mizusaki will try to animate everything in once, which is every drawing lasting one frame worth of time, to the point where even if it actually turned into the best project the world has ever seen, it will take ages to be done since they let themselves work at their own pace and methods. And that's where our next character comes in and shows the biggest reality check that Eizouken can give to audiences and artists watching.
よし、今も鳴り続ける謎のチャイムで新しいの一本考えた。いい加減にしろ。
As of now, I talked about characters that most creators online can relate to, and while you can see which content creators have turned into a professional personality, that's because they managed to make a name for themselves and took the proper measures to make their work into something more than just their love for the art. They made their passion into business. That's where some of the best characters in anime appear. Sayaka Kanamori. While this entire video is pretty much me expressing my own thoughts on this series, one of the most common misconceptions of her character is that she's a money seeker and only sees the project as an opportunity to be successful and make money. And I say it's a misconception majorly for one reason. She's not thinking about money, she's thinking about business.
ありゃしないかね。
少なくとも金はもらいます。
金の亡者め。ガサン。
仕事に責任を持つために金を受け取るんだ。
What do I mean by this? Just like how Asakusa has a focus on using animation as a way to create worlds with her creative mindset, and Mizusaki uses it as a form of expression through its practices, Kanamori focuses on making it a way of living. In other words, she focuses on the profession of media production. The first arc of the story focuses on them creating a proof of concept of what they're capable of in order to obtain budget and support from the school in order to keep working. If these characters had a dynamic similar to Ed, Double D, and Eddie, Kanamori will be all about getting the money and call it a day. But that's not how her personality actually goes by. Once the club is made, she gives everything she has in order to keep things moving within the club. There's not an actual antagonist in the show, but there are prominent characters that don't approve the practices in which they work, and that's the school counseling. They are pretty much your executive producers on the show's paper-thin metaphor, since they are dedicated on keeping the company, the school, as a respective institution instead of a negative place that even keeps their teachers working 24/7 once they supervise the clubs. This is where the series becomes into a real guidance of what you need when becoming a media content creator and why, as the show puts it, you should keep your hands out of it. Because even if you had the most creative mindset and all the expertise in how to make your projects a reality, there is a lot of professional aspects that will always be a factor to work around. Money as a whole has a huge meaning in this series since they need to obtain certain tools that the school will not provide them. They need to obtain the proper equipment, consider schedules to work on a consistent pace, set realistic deadlines and demands for the work to be done on set deadlines, make deals with other people, deal with demands from those that are giving you a chance to work to begin with, marketing and public relationships because all of these things are elements that if you're really interested in being a content creator online for a living, then you need to also consider that just like any traditional platform, online media requires a lot of elements that are beyond just creating. Hell, one of the strongest reality checks is given by Kanamori when she sets clear that even after all their work, the major reason why they are being noticed is because of the fact that Mizusaki is already a well-known public image.
映像権の一番の売りは何だと思います？
良質でこだわりが詰まった映像。
水崎氏の知名度です。
This can be noticed majorly in our current environment with how personalities from traditional media made their jump into online content and made a name for themselves much easier than the ones that have been there since the beginning. Meanwhile, there are other content creators that you may know are good but haven't been able to succeed because of the lack of attention. Her method of work is centered around the idea of being functional. Is it good? Then let's do the next thing, which becomes a clash with Mizusaki at the beginning of the series since, as I mentioned before, she tries so hard to follow her own way of working that she ends up missing deadlines, making small progress and therefore risking the chance for the club to even exist. They work around it later by allowing themselves to work with as many resources as they can with computers and techniques from motion graphics, because at the end of the day, if you want to make art for a living, you have to cut corners in order to get things done in time, which can be a good lesson for those puritans out there and for people that wonder why the algorithms don't support them. I know it's a rough thing to say, but again, in this case, there's nothing fun about social media. She also sets a ground level for Asakusa's creativity in which she needs to make sure her work can be easier to digest for the general audience, as well as to make sure she doesn't lose track on her thoughts until she's done with the current project. She is zero nonsense in comparison to the other two.
光線は
もともと怪力線は可視光線じゃないの。そんな大気をまっすぐピューンって飛ぶ光なんてないの。だいたい指向性エネルギー兵器にも種類があってだね。何もレーザーだけが兵器じゃないのだよ。レーザーだって目にも止まらぬような光を一瞬だけ照射するからコンサートみたいな映像にはならない。プラズマ化してもそれは
あんたには理解できるでしょうが、作品を見るのは一般人ですよ。
ダメか。
Hell, if we go back to the animation aspect, her movements are more rigid than to the point. And even when the money is set on the equation, she uses it as a way to establish a more solid responsibility to get the job done. In order to explain this one, I like to quote Mas from the Amasi.
What's your incentive for working hard? I can't really expect you to meet deadlines or feel the pressure to get better because in the end, you're actually getting nothing out of it. And to me, it seems like they don't have confidence in their skills to ask for payment. However, that also ends up in me also not having confidence in you. So I don't hire you. I'm sorry, you just gotta be more sure of yourself, okay? Come here. You're valuable. Now, do you want the money or not?
That's the sort of mentality that Kanamori follows. Having a reward for your hard work ends up in the business taking a bigger sense of commitment to get the job done, creating better results, which will allow them to tackle bigger projects with major rewards, making the business overall better and much more reliable as a way of living. As I have mentioned in the past, I have worked on traditional media myself. They were all local businesses, sure, but I still spent years working for a newspaper and then went to television for almost a year and did radio around that same time. And at first it was because I genuinely did not have the confidence to make the series of videos that I have made so far. But with my own experience, I can say that Kanamori is ironically the less realistic character given how supportive and open-minded she is. Like I said, it's majorly my own experiences with making businesses and working on businesses related to this, but if you ever find someone that genuinely wants you to work and is actually doing management on how the team needs to work, then keep them around because they're more uncommon and more necessary than you might think. A lot of people see this show as a way to showcase the power of imagination and creativity. And while that is technically the case, it's still handled with a sense of maturity that I honestly will recommend art schools to analyze, since it has a lot of moments in which it gets serious with its audience in terms of what they need in order to prepare themselves if they really want to make a living out of their method of preference. From animation to journalism, voiceover, theater, motion graphics, etc. Creativity and imagination is necessary, but if this is where you want your life to go, it also needs commitment, availability, education, teamwork, and humility. Because even if you think you master all of these factors, the world and society evolving, there will always be a lot of room for improvement.